It's nice to see so many of you, and we're really excited about today's session. So first of all, I'd like to welcome everyone to the Edge in Education. Please be aware that this is being recorded, so behave yourselves. The reason we do that, we always record Edge in Education so that we can post it and others who aren't able to make the live session can at least have an opportunity to see it after the fact. We'll talk a little bit more about that in a second. So I would like to welcome everyone. Please also know that as we go through this, you're welcome to put any questions or comments in the chat, in your chat, and we'll open it up for questions, comments, and discussions at the end of the session. And you may or may not know that the Edge in Education has been around a while at ISP. It's about 10 years now. And during that time, we've had the opportunity to speak with parents about major trends in education and where ISP is going as a school when it comes to educational initiatives. Originally, it was called actually the Parent Focus Group. And this was started with a number of parents as well. And at some point they came forward and said, you know, Parent Focus Group is a really boring name. How about a much sexier name like Edge in Education? And so that's where the name came from. Here's an early picture from about 8 or so years ago. You may recognize, some of the parents may recognize a few folks sitting around the table. This is in the old library. When I had hair, but those discussions started with the leadership of the school and other members of the community speaking directly to parents, and that evolved to the point where we brought in experts who were working with the faculty and staff and would also always be connected to parents and work with parents. If you go to the school website, you can view previous Edge in Educations on video, and most of these were obviously live. We're lucky to be able to at least use Zoom as a platform so that we can continue the tradition of the Edge in Education. I also wanted to mention and congratulate our community because ISP is the winner of the International Impact Award from the International Schools Awards. We just learned that yesterday, and that is due specifically to our work, our school's work in partnership with Happy Caravan, which have schools in a number of refugee camps in Greece. And we've been working with them now, I think, for about 3 years. It means that teachers and kids have actually gone over there and worked with these refugee, mostly Syrian refugee kids. And so ISP has been recognized for that. And one of the reasons I bring that up is because this is really very much connected to today's talk as well with Tom Vander. So a few words about this Edge in Education. As you know, as many of you know, we have developed learning principles at ISP. And one of them is that learners persist with relevant and rich challenges. This is very much connected to the work that Tom's been doing. He's written a number of books, and you'll hear more about him in a minute, but I do want to plug his book, Difference Making at the Heart of Learning, which is very near and dear to the heart of ISP as well. And the idea of difference making, the work with Happy Caravan and so on, is also so connected to our mission, where we talk about inspiring learners to adapt and contribute responsibly to our changing world. So we're really proud to have Tom Vander with us today. He's a thought leader, an author, a speaker. And to introduce Tom, I actually would like to briefly introduce our next ISP director, Chip Kimball, who will be joining ISP in July. After 13 years of service as ISP director, I have to say that I'm quite proud to be handing over the reins to such a highly accomplished educational leader. Having worked with Chip over the past few months, we meet on a regular basis and work on that transition from one leader to the next. I've gotten to know him even better, He's very well known in the international community. He's an accomplished leader, and I'm confident that ISP will continue to thrive, maintain its position as a recognized leader in international education under Chip's leadership. So with that, I'll ask Chip to say hi and introduce Tom.
Hi, everybody. It's a pleasure to be with you via Zoom. Although I have to be honest, I would much rather be there on site in person. As Arnie said, we've been actually working on transition since I was offered the position as the new director a year ago, just over a year ago. And we have frequent phone calls and have been planning a transition. It's fortuitous that that his transition into this next phase of his life happens at a time when ISP 2020 is coming to a close. And so in my first year, which will begin in July, we'll be talking about the next iteration of the strategic plan for ISP. And one of the things we've been thinking about is how do we retain the beautiful culture and accomplishments of ISP of today while thinking about the ISP of tomorrow to make sure that we are meeting the needs of kids and the needs of families going forward. And of course, when I was hired, this was all before COVID was on anybody's radar. And so the world has been dumped upside down on its head over the course of the last 9 or 10 months. And, and so that will have an impact as well. And so one of our goals, I actually was scheduled to be on the ISP campus this week and couldn't do that for obvious reasons. I'll be meeting with the ISP board this weekend in a day-long workshop to be talking about the future and what the future might look like for the school. And personally, I'm extraordinarily excited about joining you, about getting to know you, about learning about the history of ISP and the history of Prague and the Czech Republic, and just really engaging with you as community members and as friends. And it'll be a really exciting time for me personally and professionally. So during my now 30 years of experience in education, early in my administrative career when I was a superintendent in the state of Washington, a colleague of mine was Mr. Tom Vander, and Tom was a superintendent in a neighboring district, and we were both doing pretty heavy lifting as it relates to reform and technology integration, and how do we make sure that kids are well served in our respective communities. And we had a kinship of spirit regarding how we think about kids and how we think about education and how we think about what might best serve communities. Tom subsequently has done an amazing body of work. He from there went to the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation. He was the first executive director for the education division of that foundation, which of course now you know that now they are the largest foundation in the world. And he directed that work, that philanthropic work on how do we really think about getting the best out of schools in the United States during a 5-year period of time. And he subsequently has done, again, some extraordinarily interesting work. He led the X Prize in the United States. He was an investor in several companies. And now he currently is running an organization called Getting Smart. And the Getting Smart consulting group is designed really to help to provoke thinking, to support leaders, to record observations, and to help schools think about the future and think about how we best serve kids. So Tom has been asked to help come alongside ISP. He'll be working with our school board this coming weekend, and also be working with the leadership team in the coming weeks. And he's a dear colleague, a tremendous thought leader and thinker, and I think that you'll really enjoy him. And so I think without further ado, I'd like to hand it over to Tom. Again, thank you for welcoming me. I'm really looking forward to being on campus with you this spring, and then moving to the Czech Republic in July.
Thanks, Chip, and welcome, Tom.
Thank you, Arnie. Thanks for the introduction, Dr. Kimball. Good afternoon to everybody in Prague. Um, I'd like to spend a couple minutes this afternoon talking, reflecting on two ideas, mutuality and agency. One of the factors that led me to think about these two concepts. I saw my friend Jerome Foster on television over the weekend. He was co-hosting the American Health Summit with former New York City Mayor Michael Bloomberg. And I was really surprised to see him hosting and enjoyed his leadership. And it caused me to think about Jerome's brief history. He's an 18-year-old climate activist. You can see his picture next to Greta. He's sort of America's Greta. He graduated last year from Washington Leadership Academy. This is a new school in Washington, D.C. It's one of the XQ winners, so they received a large grant to help open this school. It's an amazing school that focuses on computer science, where despite the fact that it serves a very highly challenged population, every learner receives 4 years of advanced placement computer science. That helped Jerome launch a VR company at the tender age of 14. But Jerome became really convicted about the climate crisis, and during his junior year began holding weekly climate protests at the White House, and for about 100 weeks in a row led weekly climate protests. He also sponsored and led 3 very large Washington, D.C. climate rallies. He started a company called the Climate Reporter that continues to report on the climate crisis, and launched a philanthropic effort called 1 Million of Us. For me, Jerome is just a really terrific example of mutuality and agency. I'd love to share with you a sense of what I think those mean. By mutuality, I mean we're all in this together. We've just experienced 12 months of a global pandemic. It's probably the first time in modern history, maybe the first time since the pandemic of 100 years ago, that we've all experienced a common enemy, a common disease. But I think climate change is also a global pandemic, and those two threats, I think, give me a really visceral sense that we're all in this together. The flip side of that is agency. Agency is a term popularized about 20 years ago in sociology. It's the confidence, the self-knowledge that you can act on the world, that you can make a difference. And for me, I appreciate that Jerome first embraced the sense of mutuality, and then his teachers at Washington Leadership Academy, his parents and his community really fostered this sense of agency that, Jerome, you can do something about this, that you can take action, that you can make a difference. And it's what I appreciate about Washington Leadership Academy, and what I've grown to appreciate about ISP. I believe we're facing two extraordinary change forces that are going to shape the decade forward for us and for our kids. The first I've talked about, climate change, and specifically the mitigation and adaptation, both trying to slow it down, but also recognizing that we're so far into this, that we're quite likely to reach something beyond 2 degrees of temperature change, that adaptation is going to be as important as mitigation. And I think over the coming decade, climate change is going to have a profound impact on our economies, on our politics, and increasingly on our education. I think we can and should see climate change becoming a daily part of our curriculum as we help young people understand the ways that it's going to change their lives and livelihoods. Likewise, artificial intelligence and its related exponential technologies has quietly, since about 2017, crept into every aspect of our lives. It really impacts today the way we experience social media more broadly. It influences health, the economy, and it is already impacting career choices. We're seeing the automation of tasks in almost every profession. I think it's safe to say that AI and more broadly exponential tech is really going to change every career pathway. And so we owe it to young people to help them understand machine learning and more broadly AI and related technologies, because they're undoubtedly going to work on teams with smart tools in their profession. And so I'd love in our dialogue today to talk about ways in which we can more fully incorporate the study of climate change and the study of AI and exponential technology and the ways in which it's going to impact careers, and as a result, the way it ought to be incorporated into education. Two specific implications are that for young people, they're going to experience high novelty and complexity. 2020 is an example of that, of all of us facing new and complicated stuff, things that we've never experienced before. Our students and our children are going to, I think every year is going to be in some version of 2020 where they're facing high novelty and complexity. Chip talked about the fact that our careers have spanned the information age where we incorporated computers, but I think our kids are going to see at least 5 times the level of change, the rate of change that we have during the information age. So the big question for us is, are we equipping them for novelty and complexity? The unfortunate thing about climate change and AI is that both are going to impact underserved groups. They're going to have a disproportionate impact in America that's going to be on people of color and on communities that have been underserved. And I'm afraid worldwide that both of these trends are going to continue to spread inequality. And that's why I think the topic of mutuality is so important, that I think we have to come to grips with the fact that these change forces are pushing us apart and having a disparate impact. And it's only going to be with intentional leadership that we can begin to use smart tools for good. The good news is that our young people are growing up at a time where there's never been a better chance to make a difference, that we not only can not just prepare kids to make a difference, but that, like Jerome, we can equip and empower, as you say at ISP, young people to make a difference right now in Prague and across America. And that's the exciting thing, is that there's never been a better chance to make a difference. And I think it's our duty to inspire, to engage, to empower young people to make a difference right here, right now, right where they are. I want to spend 5 minutes on 4 more big changes that I see in the coming decade in education worldwide. The first is that schools around the world are like you, beginning to adopt broader aims. learning goals that better capture what learners should know and be able to do. Secondly, like you do at ISP, we're seeing schools around the world incorporate richer learning experiences, deeper learning, active inquiry, community connected projects, and much more work-based learning. Third, more competency-based progressions. And finally, stronger supports, personalized guidance and integrated supports. I'll say a quick word about each of those. On broader aims, I'm excited to see schools update their learning goals, and I love your learner profile. Teresa shared this with me last week, and I think it's a beautiful, simple, appropriate capturing of what young people should know and be able to do. I love the fact that you have change makers noted there. As Arnie said, my new book is called Difference Making, and here's a couple of the skills that I think are important for difference making. I captured it in leadership and problem solving, and Teresa, change making really encapsulates both leadership and problem solving. So I love that you have that in your outcome framework. I think agency is really key to personal leadership, but so social emotional learning, really becoming the ability to manage yourself, and then, as you have in your outcome framework, to collaborate effectively with others. If I drill down on change making in your platform, I'd say entrepreneurial mindset, the ability to find problems worth solving, right, and then frame those and then turn them into a project that delivers value for a community is critically important. That's often done through a structured problem solving approach like design thinking. I'd love to see the faculty adopt a structured problem solving approach that really delineates your view on thinking and change making. We're seeing schools around the world do that. So love the work that you guys are doing around broader aims. Secondly is learner experience. Like you, we're seeing schools around the world develop interesting combinations of personalized learning. I call these skill sprints, where you're using new tools to try to build thinking, communication, and problem solving skills, and combining that with active inquiry and community connected project-based learning. I'm looking forward to tools that help us do that even better, both on skill building, but also in project-based learning, authoring, and project management tools. I'm excited to see in the United States tools that help learners identify and engage and manage work-based learning. There's a new platform called Imblaze that's being used around the country that helps manage work-based learning. And I love the fact that more and more students are capturing the work that they do in portfolios that helps them share who they are. We're seeing the world move to mastery in competency-based progressions. This really has a couple implications. The first is that schools are helping learners capture and communicate their learning. And that's often done through digital credentials and increasingly through mastery transcripts. So the transcripts that we're sending to employers and colleges are not just a list of courses, but also a real description of competencies gained. Tracking these competencies is still frustratingly difficult, and you all know that from experience. I'm hoping that the tool set gets better so that it's not such a manual process. I'm also excited to see schools around the world incorporating mastery-based progressions into teacher professional learning, and many teachers around the world are earning micro-credentials. And then finally, I think later in the decade, we'll see AI tools that help build dynamic schedules for staff and students, because as students begin moving at their own rate, it makes master schedules really complicated. And we've seen just the beginning of some exciting tools that are going to make it easier to manage individual progress and individual schedules. Finally, I think we'll see real progress in learner supports and personalized guidance. This is something that Dr. Kimball made a lot of progress at Singapore American School, and what they called pastoral care, and also personalized guidance, where every learner had an individualized post-secondary plan. And I'm excited to see schools around the world both become much more sophisticated about supporting learners, attending to their mental health and wellness, and then providing really strong personalized and even localized support. We've featured some work that's happening in San Diego, California, where both learners and working adults are receiving personalized and localized guidance, zip code specific guidance on career opportunities, and personal guidance based on interests and strengths and values. And that's the sort of really robust advisory systems that we're beginning to see developed around the world. I'll say just a couple words about a couple schools that are leading the way, that are embracing these 4 trends. One is the Teton Science School. This is an independent school in Wyoming. It's a beautiful school that captures the principles that we've been talking about. They also have a really robust outdoor education program. About 20,000 young people a year visit them in the outdoor settings that look like this. This outdoor education program might be one of the extensions, the extended impact opportunities that you could look at in terms of Prague, where people could visit on a short-term basis and take advantage of your extraordinary academic program and your extraordinary physical setting. I also love the fact that Teton Science School has spawned a national network of rural micro schools, tiny schools around the country in small rural communities that incorporate these design principles: community as classroom, and learner-centered, inquiry-based learning. Again, design thinking across an interdisciplinary approach. So really a great impact engine from a very small independent school. Another small independent school in the Pacific Northwest is OneStone, onestone.org in Boise, Idaho. I love the fact that this school makes their mission so evident, that they want to make students better leaders and world a better place. They're a school that's creating an army for good through design sprints, both in school, and they run what I think is the best after school program in the world for young people in the area, and increasingly online. OneStone, like you, has a beautiful outcome framework. I love how they focus on mindsets and creativity and skills, and at the heart of it is student voice. So a beautiful sense of agency, of equipping young people to express themselves thoughtfully and in multiple dimensions. It's a school that is probably the best in the world at using design thinking across the curriculum. Those of you that know the design thinking approach from the Stanford Design School, this is an adaptation of it. In the middle of it, you see it says Ideate 51. What that means is it might take more than 50 tries to get it right, to get to a good idea. And so for those of you that teach English or teach language or teach writing, think about that 51ing it in writing, and how it might take 51 iterations to get to a good draft. So I love how design thinking is both a mindset and a methodology at OneStone, and I love how they're creating an army of good across that community. The lower right picture is a picture of Two Birds, which is a marketing agency. The students, both in the school and in the after-school program, run a fee-based marketing agency and do work for local businesses. And our Getting Smart team has been a client of the students there. And then finally, Nueva is a great Silicon Valley school. Dr. Kimball and I have had a chance to visit a number of times, and I think we both appreciate how, like you, they focus on difference making. They help learners make choices that positively and profoundly impact the world. And like Teton and One Stone, they use a project-based approach, design thinking across the curriculum. I appreciate how they have really embraced global goals in their consciousness of the environment. Let me close. I'm just thinking a lot of this weekend about Dr. King. We celebrated his life and work yesterday here in America, and I appreciate the way he talked about the fact that we are all in a network of mutuality, tied in a single garment of destiny. I loved this sentiment that you can never be what you ought to be until I am what I ought to be. And so I love how he connects mutuality and agency, that each of us has to develop into the people that we can be and should be to enable a sense of mutuality. And so I'm inspired by his work and those thoughts of mutuality and agency. And I have a few thoughts on some trends that are coming up, but I want to stop with those thoughts and really begin to address some of your questions and comments.
Thanks very much, Tom. That was a great overview of your framework, which is so relevant to ISP, as well as looking at schools that are already innovating and taking these initiatives, as we as a school community have been doing as well, and continue to look for ways to accomplish those things. And from my perspective, always connecting back to the mission of the school, we talk about empowering learners to act with compassion, integrity, respect, and intercultural understanding. And that empowerment is more than a passive kind of having one's voice heard, but how can one act to have an impact and make a difference? I also noticed in your book that you quote Malala and you quote Jane Goodall. Both of those same quotes are actually in the hallway of ISP when you walk through the school. So there's a lot of resonance in what you have to say. There's one question I see in the chat, and I encourage everyone to continue to put questions in the chat or just wave your hand virtually or literally, and we'll call on you. And Tom's responded, but maybe you can speak a little bit more to this question. Are individualized pathways and difference-making challenges related to upper school, middle school? Can they be applied to elementary as well? Do you have any examples?
Yeah, it's a really great question. I think this decade, every school can become more responsive to learners by enabling more fully individual progress models where learners are able to move at their own pace. This can be accompanied with the ability to learn and study in both cohorts and teams. And so the combination of individual progress, but in and with a sense of community, I think is the real design opportunity of this decade. I think it's particularly important in the primary grades that we pay attention to individual progress in reading and mathematics, and that we enable through performance grouping the ability for young people to be challenged appropriately so this may mean creating blocks of time where learners can move to a performance group in reading and maybe a different level in mathematics, but then move back to an age cohort for a set of project-based activity. So we are seeing schools around the world that are creating those nimble structures that allow learners to move at different times during the day in different subjects, but to do so within groups. Those groups can be dynamic so that they're as learning is reassessed every few weeks, that learners can move dynamically within performance groups, but also participate in project teams and age cohorts. The last thing that I'll add is I tend to think of K to 12 as a continuum that's really a gradual release continuum where the learning is often more teacher directed in the earlier years, but increasingly co-constructed with learners. And by the time we get to upper division work, I'd really like to see learners doing a significant amount of self-directed, co-constructed project-based learning that really incorporates interests, strengths, values, and but also acknowledges their learning levels. If we take seriously the idea of agency, we do have to increasingly allow learners to take on more ownership of their learning pathway. That's important K-12, but particularly important in high schools where we've historically, I think, infantilized students with structures that allow almost no agency. So I do think this is an urgent need for rethinking high schools so that at least a few times a year we're inviting learners into complexity. We're inviting them to do problem finding as well as problem solving, that we're walking alongside them, co-constructing experiences that the learner sees as valuable to them and valuable to their community.
Tom, I thought I'd jump in as well.
Please.
In my last assignment, we took faculty and visited about 100 schools in 6 countries. And one of the most compelling in the elementary that was doing this work that Tom described was Stonesfield in New Zealand under the direction of Sarah Martin, where indeed students had a very individualized pathway that was built by them, and it was really extraordinary what young students were able to accomplish. And when adults actually trust that kids will be responsible for their learning, it's actually quite remarkable what they're capable of doing. And so Stonesfield was one good example. Another school in New Zealand was called, I think it was Hobsonville or Hobbsville. I don't remember the exact name, but I'll gather that. And then again, Tom did mention Nueva. Nueva also does a really phenomenal job with younger students and giving them that individualized and personalized pathway. Again, and as he described, I agree that we the adults' role in the system changes as kids get older, but often we underestimate students' ability to. We put lots and lots and lots of guardrails in place because we're worried about safety and we're worried about attention and we're worried about all kinds of things for young kids. But those also have unintended consequences of having kids feel limited. And so part of the work is to create those good guardrails for kids while also unleashing the potential of kids by helping them understand that they aren't limited, that what they can think about, what they can learn, and what they can actually do has tremendous runway ahead.
Thanks, Chip. And there's a question from Dorota. How do you see the role of teachers in this model of education? Um, I think that's a great question, and it's really connected to how do we challenge the status quo and move forward?
I think it's so important that we all acknowledge ourselves as learners. Let me address that first, right? If you buy the idea that kids are going to experience a lot of novelty and complexity, and that our job is to help them walk into novelty and complexity with humility, to appreciate that they're walking into something that's new and different and complicated, but the confidence to have the cognitive muscle to know what to do first, to be able to frame a problem and to be able to use a structured problem solving approach to make sense of it and then deliver value. Then I think we ourselves need to become learners and be willing to walk into situations, walk into projects that don't have simple answers. And that can be really uncomfortable for us as educators, to move from simple known problems with known answers to spending more time in big problems without known answers, and with our learner to say, I don't know what the answer is, but how might we attack that, using an inquiry mindset, using a structured problem solving. So approaching the work as a learner first, being an learner experience designer. Our friends at Design 39 here in America, this is my favorite K-8 school, called teachers learner LEDs, learning experience designers. So thinking of ourselves as designing learning experiences that are valuable to youth, I think that's a critical mindset. And then I think the third role that I think is super important is teacher as advisor. I hope everyone here has the opportunity to work with a group of learners as an advisor. Maybe the most important thing that we do as teachers is build powerful relationships with young people, to walk alongside them and be a learning guide. From my climbing days, I think of a Sherpa, of walking alongside learners and helping them make good learning decisions. Those are different roles, different mindsets, different professional identities than many of us experienced at the beginning of our careers, but it feels like they're more important than ever.
I love the LED acronym there. I have to remember that learning experience designers is a great image for educators. There's an interesting question from Springs that's connected to the IB, but I think we could also broaden it to any sort of imposed external exam, whether it's GCSEs or AP and so on. So the question is, how do you see the agency incorporated or co-constructed experiences in the IB program or other such programs?
Let's acknowledge that it's challenging, right? Many of those traditional programs have some value given their certification, but many of them, advanced placement more than IB, are so content focused that I do think it's challenging to lead them with an inquiry and project-based focused. So yeah, let's acknowledge that they're challenging. I think across International Baccalaureate, it's easier. I do really appreciate their theory of knowledge course, where they're mindful about the nature of cognitive development. I think it lends itself a bit more to inquiry. I would just look for every opportunity to to make work as project-based and inquiry-based as possible.
Here, here.
I know Dr. Kimball really took on this challenge with his team at Singapore American School in a really beautiful way. And both, I would say that they worked inside the system and outside the system by making as many of the advanced placement courses as possible, really inquiry focused and learner centered and project based. And where that wasn't possible, they created new courses with university partners to make sure that both inside and outside those programs that the high school curriculum was really challenging and engaging.
Chip, do you want to speak to that a bit? Yeah, sure. I'd be happy to. So, I also want to go backwards for a quick second. I have a slide that I'm going to share real quick that I think is an interesting one that also describes what the modern teacher looks like, because the teacher, the teacher question was raised. So I'm just going to share my desktop for a quick second. It's messy, so forgive me for that, but I think you can see it. So here you can see that here are some of the characteristics of the modern teacher, where they see themselves as co-learners, not teachers. They allow themselves to fail often. They invite mistakes into their lives. They embrace change. They model resiliency and perseverance. They dream big and ask why not. These are some of the things that the modern teacher will need to do and that we would encourage in order to accomplish the educational outcomes that Tom had described and that we're seeing in some of these other schools. So that was that part. In terms of the relationship between this kind of an educational agenda against a structured program like the IB, and again, Tom referenced this work that I'd done in Singapore, where AP was the standard of the day. You know, the first part of this is figuring out what we can do within the context of the IB in order to create these same kinds of experiences, knowing that there are guideposts and in some cases fairly restrictive guideposts, but there are opportunities within that context in order to innovate. And you know, Eric Strum, the upper school principal, certainly has experience in doing that, and so that's kind of the first approach to that. The second then is what kinds of experiences do we create for kids outside the context of that particular curricular framework, either in the form of other courses or in the form of things like internships and work experiences and service and a host of other things, understanding that we do have to be cognizant of not overloading upper school kids. And that's a real challenge. It's really easy to be additive rather than to replace. And I think the complexity that Tom referred to, in my mind, one of the most difficult components and the most complicated components is how do we add new experiences or create new experiences for kids that are more consistent with what we think they need, without simply layering on top of what everyone else has thought that they've needed for the last 50 years. And I think that's actually part of the heavy lifting of faculty and leadership in figuring that part out.
Such as what do we let go of, as opposed to just keep piling on more and more. We've got two other questions. The first one from CK was, what was the time frame for the rollover from teacher-directed lessons to self-directed agency-focused learning experiences? So I'm not sure whether it's referring to a specific school, but do you have a sense, Tom, perhaps about what is that time frame? How long does it take to go from one to the other? Although I'm sure that it's always a work in progress.
Yeah, I think it is for all of us. I said I view sort of a roughly a continuum from K to 12, where we ought to have a shared goal of increasingly inviting learners to own both learning goals and learning experiences, where by the time they're in high school, we can they can really take ownership of a set of learner objectives, and in some cases can co-construct learning experiences with us as educators. A quick example of this, one of the leading high poverty districts in our country in the Central Valley of California is called Lindsay, California. Great example of a place that has individual progress model where every learner every day can describe their learning goals. And so if you go up to third or fourth graders and ask them what they're studying, they can show you their learning goals for the day, their learning goals for the unit, and they really have taken ownership of what's next for me as a learner. And so building a system that allows learners to take ownership and to begin setting goals for themselves, I think is really powerful.
Thanks, Tom. And actually, Laura has a question.
Arnie,
Sorry.
before you go forward, I'm just, CK, I just want to make sure, CK, that we answered your question. I told her to unmute, but she says she can't unmute. So maybe Sheldon can let people unmute if they want to ask the question verbally.
CK, did you want to say more about your question?
Just a second. Oh, thank you. Thank you. Actually, I'm sorry, Tom, I should have been a little clearer. What I was curious about is what was the time frame like for the teachers as the school went through the research, design, and delivery of the learning experience? Because I think that's a really important component to take a look at as you start to look at shifting into self-directed learning experiences.
It is. That's a great question. Your experience at ISP is probably as good as any. You have a beautiful framework, and it's one that has taken a decade to develop. It depends how large and complex the system is and the level of challenge, but I would say that in large complex systems, it takes a decade to really do transformational work. In a small, nimble school, over the course of several years, you can do transformational work. So it depends, but as you know well, it's really challenging.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
I failed at the outset just to say how thrilled I was to find your academic framework. Teresa shared that with me a week ago, and it's as elegant an articulation of a set of shared aspirations as I've seen. So you've done really extraordinary work over the last decade, and I think are really poised to do work that's not only valuable for your learners, but I think important to the world as really a beacon school for what progressive education can mean and look like.
Do you mind if I jump in on that one just for a moment?
Please.
I think part of the time frame, CK, is related to the culture of the institution that you're working within. Because with adult learning, teachers or other adult professionals, it's as much about unlearning as it is about learning. And that unlearning process requires vulnerability. And the only way that an adult is going to be willing to be vulnerable in unlearning what they do and has worked for them for a good portion of their career and do something different is if the cultural environment is safe to do so. And so from a leadership perspective, we often talk about building that culture of safety and that culture of innovation and that culture where people can try things and successfully fail, if you will. And that will be an accelerant to actually seeing the change. But even in the most ideal of cultural, in the most ideal of cultural organizations, and in those that are small and nimble, you're still going to be a minimum of 3 to 5 years to make any substantive changes in terms of this kind of work, from my perspective.
Thank you for speaking to that, because I think that's one of the most important parts is disruptive education, and being aware the education trends are really important. But to understand the time frame it takes to do that, we can very quickly get excited about this, but understanding that it does take time. So thank you for speaking to that. I appreciate that.
And I would add to that, and I think we've all been saying that this is a continuum that doesn't really end, and it's a journey. And thankfully, ISP has very high aspirations in this area, so that we have a culture that understands that that's what we're about as a school. But nonetheless, every disruption and major change is going to take time. And that's actually connected, I think, to Laura's question as well, because one of the things we're proud of at the school is that if you look at the mission of the school, we always talk about learners as opposed to just students. Everyone in the community is a learner. And we want every learner, whether they're teachers or support staff or parents, to be empowered. And so Laura asks, how do you see the expertise and agency of teachers intersecting with the agency of learners? So it's this idea that it's not only about the student's agency, what about the teacher's agency? Tom, do you want to speak to that one?
Yeah, this is it's a great challenging question. So let me acknowledge that the Sherpa metaphor is probably a flawed analogy, but it appropriate at least for the role of advisor, of walking alongside learners and guiding, monitoring progress and guiding next steps. As a teacher, as I said before, I believe the responsibility to construct a sequence of valuable learning experiences is such an important job, and often the primary way in which we express our professional expertise, by constructing powerful learning environments and experiences. There are occasions where, through direct instruction, we're also sharing our expertise. I think many of us acknowledge that there's probably, when we went to school, that was the dominant form of instruction. What I'm suggesting is direct instruction today remains important, but a smaller component, complemented by powerful experiences that are either an inquiry or a project, but one that's been constructed artfully, thoughtfully, and packed with as many valuable outcomes as possible. So I guess I think about that as the primary way I hope our expertise would be expressed.
Great. Thanks so much, Tom. And I think we have to wrap up. Time flies when you're having fun. This was a very thought-provoking and welcome opportunity for us to talk about something other than COVID, and to talk about what we do with kids and with our community connected to learning. I want to say how much we miss all of you in person. We miss our parent community. At the moment, we only have grades early childhood through grade 2 on campus. We hope that in the next week or two, we'll be able to welcome more back. And we so look forward to welcoming the entire parent community back on campus. And I want to thank Tom for his work. And it's exciting that we'll be able to work with him moving forward. And even after I move on, that there'll be that connection with ISP, because your thinking is so much in line with what we think is important as a school community. Any other final words before we say goodbye, say farewell for now.